Good morning and welcome to Black Mental Health Matters. My name is Sonia Hurt. I'm the host for today, and our guest today is Dr. Sharion Brown. Dr. Brown has over 10 years experience in the field of social work with 6 years of experience as a clinician. She has experience with the Kentucky's Child Welfare System, community social work, psychiatric inpatient and outpatient treatment, and work in the public school system. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's certified in dialectical behavior therapy, and she is a certified clinical anxiety treatment professional. She specializes in adolescent treatment and has a passion for working with youth. Welcome, Dr. Brown, to today's show.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Now, today we're discussing the awareness, raising the awareness and reducing the stigma, loneliness, and isolation as it relates to mental health. My first question is well, it's not a question really. I'm going to ask you to give me a brief description of isolation and what it means to you.
Mhm. So by definition, isolation is being separated from others, right? So when people are experiencing isolation, they're secluded from others, and with that seclusion and separation, they are not interacting with people on a regular basis or at all, and they are not having social contact with others.
Excellent. So, how does isolation impact on one's mental well being? I know there's some persons who like to be naturally in isolation, who don't want to interact with others. How does that impact on their well being mentally?
hmm so I'm happy you said that because the first thing I wanted to mention is that isolation is not always bad when a person is isolating for their own solitude. It starts to become a problem when it is not that case. So in those situations, people are experiencing isolation and they may lack friends, family relationships, co-workers, and they may have all of the above. Um, and they might not have connections with them at this moment. So when the isolation is not for their own solitude, it can cause a multitude of problems with not only their mental health but their physical health. So, when you're thinking of a person as a whole, isolation can cause depression, anxiety, frustration, and irritability, cognitive decline, and it has also been linked to strokes and other cardiovascular problems. And it's important to note that older adults are also at risk for more hospital stays when they're isolated.
I'm glad that you said that because medical research is showing that being in community really helps with our overall well-being, not just mentally but physically as well. So I'm really glad that you went there with that. So my next question goes towards loneliness because you tend to think of isolation as being away from people, and then you have that other spectrum of I'm alone or I'm
hmm
lonely. And I've dealt with situations where people would call me up and say, I feel lonely, I need
hmm
someone to talk to. And that's all they're really looking for, that level of companionship. So, what
hmm
is the difference between isolation and loneliness, if there is such a difference?
hmm Well, there's definitely a difference. And what you said about someone calling just feeling lonely, that's extremely important. Because the difference is, they have a difference, but they also kind of interconnect. So a person who is isolated for their own solitude might not feel lonely. However, you can be isolated socially for other reasons, and that can cause loneliness. So loneliness is when a person wants to have social contact and they feel like they have no one to interact with. But in a state of being alone. But isolation is just that you are isolated from others. But when it comes to loneliness, you could live alone. by yourself and not feel lonely, because you can still have social interactions, you can still have social contacts, you can still call people. However, you could be in a room full of people and still feel lonely,
That's true.
because you might be in that room and you might not have anyone to interact with, right? So isolation is when you are isolated from others, but that loneliness extends to, you could be with other people and still have that sense of loneliness.
As I hear you speak, I'm moved to ask the question, what causes loneliness? What causes a person to feel lonely, even though they are surrounded by lots of people?
hmm So they might not feel a connection with those other people in the room, or they could be scared to talk to someone. If no one approaches them, they feel that sense of loneliness, right? Um, they might not even know anyone in that room, and they might not feel comfortable even approaching people. You can feel that sense of loneliness, or I mean, it could link back to mental health. A lot of times when people are have suffer from depression or anxiety, they kind of move away from others. And so you could still be with other people, but isolate yourself from those people and get that sense of loneliness.
If I'm understanding you correctly, I can be with people, but there is no connection. There is no, let me go and say hi to Dr. Brown because I'm singling her out as a person that I feel drawn to speak to. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there is some other internal things going on that would prevent a person from making contact with other people, even though they have access to other people.
Yes, there could be times where a person might have some other things going on where um, they do not have the ability to make contact with other people.
My next question coming from this, is this prevalent with particular groups, let's say particular age groups, particular ethnic groups, or is this across the board?
It can I feel like it's across the board, but when you think about it, I mean, you have to feel a sense of connection or connectedness with the people that you are with, right? So if you're not feeling that, um, it's hard to be social. Um, so that could, in a sense, cause someone to feel lonely in a room full of other people.
If I'm hearing you correctly, I'm hearing that there's a sense of disconnect from the individual who feels lonely, even though there are other people in the room. And I think what I'm trying to get at is what would be the root cause of that kind of, and I'm going to say antisocial behavior,
Mm-hmm.
because I could walk into a room full of people and just zoom in on a couple of people that I want to talk to,
Mm-hmm.
or in some instances I just don't feel like interacting and I just say, well, hi and goodbye and just be by myself, even though there are people there.
Mm-hmm. I think that it could be both of what you just said, right? It could. There are some times where you could be in a room full of people you know, and I could, just speak to myself. I might be in a room full of people I know, right? And these are people that I've had connections with for my whole life. But in that moment, I might still feel lonely because I don't feel like I have any type of connection in that moment with those people. And it could be from my own, it could be for my own mental health issues, right? Like, and I'm just using myself just as an example person. It could be because I have my own internal things going on and I do not feel connected with those who are with me in that moment. Um, that could cause me to feel lonely.
I'm going to talk a little about a village called Roseto. I think it's in the USA. I don't remember which state it's in, but I know it was a village of Italian immigrants.
Mhm.
And coming out of that village, there was that sense of community where the people experienced really good health, because every evening after work, there was some sort of community gathering where they had meals together, conversations together. And I think this was promoted by the church within that community. And I mention this to say that loneliness among the elderly, especially here in Barbados, is a real thing. Yeah, we find a lot of elderly people who become alone because there is no sense of community anymore for them. It's like you've reached retirement age, you're a little bit immobile. So, as a young person, I really don't have time to call and check in, come and sit with you and say hi. And I know from experience that a lot of elderly people experience loneliness, they feel alone. And if you're not conscious of this within your own community, we tend as younger people to sideline those people without giving thought to their existence. How are you feeling? Like go to your neighbor next door and say, "Hi, Mrs. Gardner, how you doing today?" There's no one living with you. I just came in to say hi, and spend a few minutes doing some chat to keep you company, more or less.
Mhm.
What
Yes.
would you say to situations like that where there is a generation gap that keeps some people isolated, and that isolation leads to loneliness? What would you say to that?
And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it is important. You could be in a room full of people or in an area with people, and they don't come to you due to that gap. I think it's important for people to, like you said, that generation, for the generations between those, right, to kind of help keep those connections alive. I know there are times within Black families where there's that where parents will like, have you talked to you, or just in general, people in general, but have you talked to your grandparents today? Have you reached out to your great aunt? Have you reached out to your great uncle? Have you reached out to your, whoever? I think that's important to have, the everyone kind of work together to make sure that people are getting reached out to, because there are a lot of elderly people who are at home alone, and they don't have relatives that are reaching out, like you said. um it's important for everyone to kind of work together to make sure that everyone is still feeling connected, in that sense of connectedness. I know the pandemic made it a little harder, and people had to isolate for reasons outside of their own. And I think it was important that, there were some. I know here in Kentucky there were some community workers who were willing to um, drop off groceries to the elderly population, just to check on them. So I think that that's really important.
So my next question is, do we consider the elderly at risk for mental health issues, of being unwell mentally? Or do we continue to ignore and say, well, a lot of these conditions that they have are just due to old age? They're cranky because they're elderly. They're cranky because they have pains to deal with. Um, would you say that love, and I'm coming to this because of my own background, that love plays a key element in keeping one's mental faculties intact?
Um, I would say, it could. I hate to say it could be all of them, but I think that love does keep it intact. But I mean, there are certain, cognitive decline does come with old age, right? But I think that, though, that sense of connectedness and that sense of community can keep someone cognitively thriving, right? As long as they have those connections. Um, and I don't think it's necessarily that, you know their isolation or their elderness, them being elderly, can we're just going to say it's their mental health. It's not always going to be that, right? um but we do know that, studies have shown that there is a cognitive decline, but still having that sense of connectedness is just really important. um if that answers that question.
Yes, it does. And that brings me to, I'm moving from the elderly to the very young and the very vulnerable,
Hmm.
because I personally take issues with children being isolated for long periods of time away from that stability of family, especially when it is started from the age of 6 weeks, where they are thrust into daycare system with strangers, Um, and I've always wondered, how does that impact the development of a young child from that stage into adulthood? Does that impact the psyche in some way, where they feel like, one, abandonment, that sense of loneliness? Does it impact the trust that they would have in the adult community around them?
Mhm. I say it definitely could. When you think about, those age ranges as when they're younger, they're going through the trust versus mistrust. They're trying to figure out who they are establishing their connections with, right? So you get these connections, say your mother was able to get maternity leave. We know that that's hard in a lot of areas. And you are getting this comfort in this relationship with your mom, and then 6 weeks later you're thrown somewhere else and you only see your mom for a couple of hours, right? That can make a difference. I think that still that sense of what happens after that, like if the mom is still really connected when the time she gets home. But that's another soapbox for for another day.
It is. It is.
Um,
But it is something that I'm curious about because I
mhm,
feel very strongly about those formative years as it
mhm,
relates to the emotional stability, because I know that our emotions play a part in our mental stability.
mhm,
And that when things happen to us at a very young age, it more or less goes into the subconscious mind, and we
mhm,
act out our behaviors from the subconscious mind without being conscious of the triggers that have really caused us to be where we are.
mhm,
So for me, looking at the age group where I'm 6 weeks old and my mother has abandoned me and this person is taking care of me. But if you have 10 babies to look after all at once that are not your babies, I don't think you can nurture them in the same way as your own personal child.
mhm,
And maybe within our societies, as children get older, maybe that's why we see the level of mental health issues among young people to the point where they are destructive.
mhm,
And you've seen this in the USA that most of the shootings recently were young people.
mhm,
And I think if we can raise the awareness of women to really look after the emotions, especially during pregnancy and after pregnancy, and have a plan. How am I going to raise a citizen, a world citizen that is going to be compassionate, going to be mentally stable in a world where we're all encouraged to get as much money as possible, and therefore women want to work for what they want to earn
mhm,
so that they can be independent. It is unfortunate because that nurturing for me has to take place from very young. What am I putting into this young person that is coming before me so that as they grow up, they are mentally sound? Because I
mhm,
think a lot of mental health issues start before birth.
mhm. That is
I
true.
think that children pick up the trauma of the parents. I think that women of childbearing age should see mental health as the norm and not the odd thing that happened to a few people. Because in as much as we're told to balance our diet, to balance our exercise, diet and
Mhm,
exercise, I don't think that enough is being done in terms of getting people into a state of mental wellness.
mhm,
I don't think it is being promoted, as something that we really need to do on a consistent basis. Rather than ask people, how are you feeling? We should really be asking people, how is your thinking? What's going on within you? Because I think that thinking is really bringing you into alignment with everything that out pictures in your world.
mhm. I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think that's where I was getting at when I said that's another soapbox. There are so many different policies that need to be changed. In support of pregnant mothers. And I think that goes into a lot of other things like intergenerational trauma, because a lot of times these parents are going into parenthood and have not addressed their own trauma. So then not only do we have, trauma while in the womb, like you mentioned, but then we have that trauma when we come out and our parents are just doing what they know. because they have not yet addressed their trauma. So then it kind of can be passed on generationally. Um, and then as far as being able to get all the support needed while pregnant and after a baby's born, and that's that soapbox where I think that a lot of things need to change policy wise, because this a lot of places it's not set up for the success of the mother or the child.
I agree with you there. And I know we're talking about raising the awareness of mental health from the position of the stigma and the loneliness.
Hmm.
But I'm of the opinion that that has to start with the younger generation coming up. That the education has to be for young people to understand that they are not just a physical body, but they're also an emotional body and a spiritual body, and that attention has to be placed on all these different areas of your life in order to bring about that mental stability, because everything is interconnected.
Hmm.
Everything. And if I'm hearing you correctly, I think what you're saying is let's get policies in place, but policies alone I don't think would make a difference. People always find a way to sideline policies. And
Hmm.
we're dealing with mental health. And in dealing with mental health, we really have to look at what's going on within the mind, what's happening at the soul level. How are we
Hmm.
going to really change that? And I think one of the best ways to do that is through experiential education,
Hmm.
having activities that allow people to deal with the trauma as it comes up. And we don't wait until you reach a certain age then to say, well, let's deal with this. Because by the
Hmm.
time you hit the teens, it is the subconscious mind has made certain patterns already
Hmm.
that then it becomes very challenging for even the best of therapists
Right.
to reverse. So I'm of the opinion that education within the school system, I think churches also, any
Hmm.
community-based place where you get large gatherings, that's where you have to put the focus. Start to talk to people about mental health, and not mental health as in you are crazy, because there's so many different aspects of being mentally unwell.
Hmm.
So I honestly think that the conversation needs to go beyond policy and into activities that get people to really self examine themselves. Okay, well, today this is how I'm feeling because something happened to me that I'm not quite sure I understood. And
Hmm.
it may have happened way back when, you know. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Bradley Nelson, who does a lot of emotional code work where he looks at the trauma that you've experienced. He tries to identify the trauma you've experienced from wherever you experienced, whether it's in the womb, whether
Hmm.
it's as an adult, and really help you to work through those challenges,
Hmm.
identify the trauma, and release that trauma.
Hmm. I'm not aware, but I'm gonna look more into it. And I think um everything that you are saying is hitting the nail right in there. It's important. I think there are, so I know specifically, I'm gonna speak specifically just to my county, here in Kentucky. I know within our school systems, mental health is a huge it's really important, right? So we have a lot of mental health specialists in all of these schools here in Fayette County. It's very important. And I think that I wish it was something that was adapted further. It's something that needs to be pushed more. So these kids are having, these kids are getting groups, these kids are getting individual services, and it is, not something that the families are paying for, while these kids are in school. I think that is important. And like you said, the churches, I know some churches are starting to, take mental health more seriously and trying to help people. I know a lot of that stigma is, oh, just pray about it, right? Or, there's that stigma there, but it's like we have to acknowledge it too, right? We have to find other help. You're like, yes, let's pray too, but let's also get help because we'll go to the doctor when we're not feeling good physically, right? We'll go to the doctor for anything else a lot of times, but our mental health, and that has to be a priority as well.
Okay, my next question.
Mhm.
And I think I've asked all the questions in a very roundabout way,
Mhm.
but I want to really zone in specifically on other ways in which we can raise that awareness. How do we get that message out there to every section of the society, not just the elderly and the middle age, but to everyone,
Mhm.
so that we understand the role we play as individuals on each other's mental health? Because sometimes we can be very mean and cruel to other people
Mhm.
based on what we say and what we do and how we treat people. Um, Last time I was on the show, I heard Dr. Kevin Washington speak about the philosophy of Ubuntu. This is something that's very dear to me as well, because I believe that I exist because you exist, that we're all one at the end of the day, and that how I treat you, and this is me being a spiritual practitioner, is how I treat God. And I always say that the way I treat you is the way I treat God. And for most of us, based on our religions, we tend to have these separatist ideas that
Mhm.
because I am here in a church and you're there in the mosque, we're all different. But the truth is that we're just one people. We all suffer from the same issues at the end of the day. So, what are some of the ways that we can bring everyone that we know, people of color, people who are not of color? Now, this is about Black mental health, but we all have to interact with each other at some point in
Mhm.
time. How do we destigmatize mental health issues
Mhm.
so that we are more compassionate towards each other?
Mhm.
So that if I'm experiencing some sort of offset, I don't feel ashamed and embarrassed to talk about it or to seek help for it.
Mhm. So some ways that I feel like um we need to be talking about mental health openly, and that's within all communities, right? That's something that's really important. Another thing is, just educating everyone, educating ourselves, educating those that we know. But another thing that's really important is language. When you think about the history of mental health and the language that we use, you hear things like, oh, someone's a loony, or they're a psycho, or they're just different. Those create they create negative connotations, right? It creates a sense that mental health is negative, and it doesn't make anyone, it kind of helps to stigmatize it. Fixing that language and understanding that language is powerful and how we use it, and creating safe spaces where we can all talk about mental health and not make someone feel like they're different, or or something is wrong with them in such a negative way. And then I always say, check on your people, right? Check on people in general. Um, Learning those signs, and those warning signs and those symptoms. Not saying that you have to go out and be a mental health practitioner, but just those little things. When you notice someone that you are connected to is off, let's create those conversations. Let's talk to them, but not in a way that we are coming at them, but then where we are trying to understand what's going on, and find out ways that we can help them and make them feel comfortable in what they're going through.
So, at a community level,
Mhm.
how can having the community and family impact on persons who are having mental health issues positively? How can family community really make a difference to those persons? In what ways can they really assist in making them feel more included in society?
Mhm. Well, naturally, we are social beings, right? So when you think about how we learn and how we thrive, is due to most of that is due to social interactions. And community is usually about those connections that we make. So, being in a community can give us a sense of purpose. It can make us feel like we belong. It can also offer us support. Um, and when I was preparing for this, a lot of studies that I found that having a neighborhoods that have higher social cohesion experience lower rates of mental health problems. That's because those people are, creating supports for each other. Um, those people are, you know, one person might have one role in the community, the other person might have another role. We're giving people a sense of belonging. Um, And I think that having people in your corner and understanding, what's going on, giving you love and support makes a huge difference. Among the people that, the clients that I've seen, those clients that had a sense of a community, a family, a, a friend group, a sense of any type of community, they had more positive outcomes within their treatment, because they had those people who made them feel, I want to say, I'm trying to be mindful about my words, but almost like safe. They felt like they had some type of connection to other people, and they felt like they had a safe space to talk about these things. I think that that makes a huge difference. And as a community, we kind of need to get back to that, because I'm noticing that we don't have that anymore. Neighbors don't know each other. You used to have your play auntie down the street or your play uncle across the street. People don't have that anymore like we used to. Um, and I think that is also, that aids in that isolation and that loneliness. People aren't getting to know each other. People aren't connecting anymore.
Would you say that technology plays a part in that isolation? That you know, I don't know if you've been out to dinner with friends and everyone is on their device, and they're ignoring you. And I personally find it very rude to be in someone's presence and they're physically and you're having a conversation with someone other than me. Would you say that technologies are playing a part one in the overall mental health issues that we're seeing today of isolation and loneliness?
I do. I believe it does. When you think about it, I I go out when I go out to eat. Everyone, and I mean everyone in the restaurants on their phones. Um, these I think these Now I noticed that in working with youth, a lot of them are like, oh, they take their value based on these. I don't want to say fake, but these form relationships of people who don't really know them, right? And so it's all about how many likes they can get or how many comments they can get. And that's how they um, consider themselves being social. It's not that actual in person interaction. So a lot of these people are text, the text message instead of having a conversation. Um, so then when it comes to them having an actual social time where they're in person, they don't know what to do, because they don't know how to interact with each other. Um, and I think that using technology a lot of times has taken away from that in-person interaction, that is very needed and necessary. And even I know, during the pandemic when students weren't in school, all they had was technology, and we're coming back in school and we're seeing a lot of, behavioral problems. We're seeing a lot of kids not knowing how to communicate with each other. So there's more conflict, right? Because they don't know how to interact anymore. They don't know how to be social anymore because that was all they had. It plays a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in that.
I'm glad that you touched on that because as you're speaking, what I'm hearing is that there is a need for social graces to be back in the school where you're teaching children how to interact with each other, how not to be too self centered,
Mhm.
you know, and how to really communicate. Because texting is not communication. There's some things that are lost. You don't hear the tone the same way as if I'm speaking to you direct. You don't see expression.
Mhm.
So I think that if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying there is a need for social graces to be in the school being taught to young kids, maybe even in the workplace being taught to those young persons who are very tech savvy as to how to relate to each other. And I'm also hearing there's a need for conflict resolution classes as well. How do we resolve conflict?
Mhm. Yes. Or
Without
just
getting violent, without becoming violent and aggressive.
mhm. I mean, I even see it with adults too, though. When you think about it, adults will be texting each other, and the next thing I hear is, I'll hear, just around people, they're being rude, and it's a text message. How can you tell? Or when they finally talk, the person's like, I didn't mean it like that. I'm sorry you read it that way. Everything's kind of open to how you interpret it when we are sending text messages and emails and not actually speaking with each other. And I think that that can cause, a lot of issues that would be avoided if we actually had, you know, social interactions in person or on the phone or um, where we could, hear a tone, like you said, or
Yeah, and have
see
people
a
feel
facial
questioned.
expression,
Yeah.
or things like that, body language, things like that.
Yeah, texting does not allow for that. One of the other things I would like to comment on as far as technology goes, it is that, and I don't want to say coldness, but I think people become more cynical and in some cases very stoic. Um, and I'm saying this from personal experience that I've observed,
Hmm.
where there is that no connection at all, self
Hmm.
isolation through technologies. Like, I don't want to go out there. I don't want to interact with people. I have no friends other than my social media friends.
Hmm.
And I know growing up as a young girl, even though we had some restrictions as to how far we could go in the neighborhood,
Hmm.
we were given freedom to roam. We were given freedom to go and socialize.
Hmm.
And there was a trust because you knew your neighbors.
Hmm.
And a matter of fact, in my neighborhood, we were all related more or less. There were cousins on top of cousins on top of cousins. You knew everyone, down to the fifth cousin. And there was that trust where parents were not afraid to leave home and leave the kids alone in the house or even running around outside because there was that trust. You knew that your children would be safe.
And the crazy thing is, like I mentioned earlier, we had to play cousins, we had to play aunties, we had, building relationships. A lot of people don't know their neighbors. You don't know who's to the side of you. You don't know. A lot of kids aren't playing outside. I see that within where I live at. I'm like, where are the children at? It's hot outside. There are no kids playing outside.
Well,
You
I
don't
make
see
it
that.
a point to get to know who my neighbors are. If someone new moves into the neighborhood, I go on and introduce myself.
Mhm.
Um, but it is pretty much like that here in Barbados as well, where we don't know our neighbors in the same way that someone who lives in the village know their neighbors. Different neighborhoods, you have these developments, and you're lucky if you see your neighbor. You're
Mhm.
very lucky. But I think what I was trying to get at is that trust also plays a part in mental well-being.
Mhm.
Being able to trust someone so that you can connect to someone and say, you know what, this person I can trust. If something's going wrong with me, I can call this person and say, look, can I talk to you?
Mhm.
Can I talk to you? And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, one of the places, because every now and again I may go to the barber shop and you hear the guys talking. Men tend to hold a lot in,
Mhm.
and I think that barbers should become trained to also do therapy rather than just say, let me just cut your hair, but to really help people in a significant way.
Mhm.
Be trained that when you listen, you listen for those telltale signs of when somebody's suicidal
Mhm.
or homicidal in some cases, or just plain abusive.
Mhm.
I know in the USA you have a duty to report as a therapist if someone is going to do harm.
Mhm.
You have a duty to report abuse and stuff like that. Elderly and children. Um, in Barbados, we don't have those laws as yet, but I'm hoping that we get there. But I think there's so many avenues where education can take place. As I said, the barber shop. Barbados is known for its rum shops, and this is another place where education can happen
Mhm.
because it's where you find people gathering who have challenges but are afraid to go and sit in the therapist's office. I don't want anybody see me coming from a psychiatrist's office or a counselor's office because then
Right.
they'll think, oh, got problems. And
Right.
I don't know. I think for Black people, we've been taught to be secretive about our challenges, not to
Mhm.
talk about it. Things are supposed to be so embarrassing, you don't want the neighbors to know. Keep your business to yourself, kind of society.
Mhm.
I know that's true for most Caribbean people. We're not encouraged to talk about our challenges. And therefore, for persons who are having challenges mentally, things are not going well for them, they have a difficulty talking.
Mhm.
And it comes back to that element of trust. I don't trust people. I've even heard people say, you know, you can't go to the pastor with certain things because he comes on the pulpit and he talks about it.
I heard
And
that.
if you live in a fishbowl like Barbados is, we're very small, people know who you are referring to. And this is a known fact. I've heard one of my facilitators in a course I was taking in clinical pastoral education say this. She said they were having a discussion about someone's case, and she said she knew the person. Although no names were mentioned, she knew the person.
Mm,
And this is a challenge that a lot of people face. And this is why they don't want to come forward, because I don't want people telling my story when I can't even tell it myself.
right. Hmm. That's so important. And I mean, you mentioned, Barbados, the same here, those, like you said, a lot of people might not feel comfortable going to go talk to someone in the office. It's the barber shops, the hair salons, you
The
know,
rum shop.
hmm the people that you can, feel a sense of connection to, and the people that you feel like you can trust makes a big difference in you being able to open up and saying, "Hey, I have a problem. This is what's going on." Um, I think that is so important. That is extremely important.
So, share a bit more about what you do within the school setting with young people.
Hmm. So I am there as a support. So although I am a licensed therapist, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. In that specific role, my title is a mental health specialist. So I provide different support for the students. I have students who are having some anxiety or some depression or some self esteem. I get with those students and kind of help them through that, find ways that they can cope, figure out what their triggers are, um, and just be of a support. And then if I have to refer out, I refer out. And then I do therapy on the side too. Um, so I help with that there. But when it comes to in the school, just making sure I'm meeting the needs of the students who are there. Every student who had needs something unique and individually. So I make sure that I cater to that, unique need. Um, Groups. We have different groups within our school for different needs as well. So all of those are a form of support and a way for kids to engage and recognize. I know a lot of students are like, "Oh, dang, I didn't know. I thought I was the only person going through this." When they get in those groups and they form these friendships and these bonds with people who they know, have had similar experiences as them. Just that form of being connected within those groups is really important. So that's what I do. I help out individually and on a group level for students, whether it's behavioral, whether it's their specific mental health needs. I help out with those.
Okay. Hi. Um, my next question relates to the. Give me 1 second.
No, you're fine.
Yeah. My next question relates to being reclusive. What about the recluse, the person who chooses to be alone?
Hmm.
Is that a form of mental illness?
Um, I wouldn't specifically say that it is right, because when it comes to someone who is a recluse or decides to be reclusive, it depends on the context. Really, you can have a person who thrives when they are alone. They choose to be alone. That is when they're happy. They're going towards their solitude. But then you have to remember that, there are people who use um, that as a way as an excuse to kind of mask their depression, right? Or then you have to remember that those are people who have mental health disorders like schizoid personality disorder, where they are oftentimes reclusive. I think it depends on the context of someone's reclusion and why they are deciding to be alone, because like I said, there are people who every now they decide to they thrive when they're alone, um, and but then there are all those people who are reclusive when they have something else going on and they may not know how to express that, or they may have mental health um, issues that cause them to be more reclusive.
Understood. Well, I think I've asked the questions that I could ask. Is there anything else you would like to share with us in terms of becoming more aware of mental health issues and the stigma of loneliness and isolation and how it impacts people in general?
Mhm. I say, like I said earlier, check on your people. Check on those that you know, those that you love, those that you don't know. You might see someone that you usually see them and they're happy, and then you see them another time they're sad. Check on those people. Educate yourself on, like I said, mental health, signs, warning signs, symptoms, and create safe spaces for people. I know a lot of times people will joke around about something and not realize that someone in that room is being affected. Someone may joke and be like, "Oh, this person's crazy," and you know, then someone else in the room might feel some way. Be mindful of your language. Be mindful of how you're speaking and what you're speaking about, and always make sure that you're creating safe spaces for others.
So, how do we do that? How do we create that safe space in an environment where so many people are opting to self isolate with technology
Mhm,
or become so busy that they do not have time to address mental health issues that are affecting them? We can bury ourselves in busyness so as not to
mhm,
deal with issues. How do we get to that place where people become more aware that something is not right inside of me
mhm.
mentally?
That one is, I think, when you mention, that the people who are, busy and the people who are so engulfed in, technology, I think it gets harder. I think, because, it's up to people, people who know them or their friends or their families to go and check on people. Um, but I think you can even create safe space, for those people who are always on technology and those people who are always on social media. um, you know, we have a lot of groups out there that people can join, to where they feel like they can relate to. But I think that's the issue. I think those um the people who are engulfed in technology and the people who um are so busy, it's hard to do that. It's where they have to rely on the people around them and the community around them. And then when it comes to um I think people know, some people, not all people, some people can tell when something's off. They might not be able to put a word to it, or they may be so busy that they can't. I know, I've talked to some elderly people that and they have told me, when I was younger, I went through this, and we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk about this, but now that I'm seeing things on TV and I'm hearing things, I'm realizing that I'm depressed. I think I'm depressed. I think I've been depressed. um, I think finding ways to incorporate mental health in, you know, whether it's an ad, whether it's a pop up, whether it's, finding ways for those people who are engulfed in technology to try to, get them thinking about, am I really okay? Is this something that I'm feeling? Um, Yeah, sorry, I was I was gonna keep going, but yes, that's one way. But outside that, it's relying on, you know, other people around you to check on you sometimes, because it's hard for a person to just be like, I have this problem, I'm gonna get help. Right? Sometimes we have to rely on our loved ones and our community and other people around us.
I'm in agreement with you on that, that we do have to rely on people, and that means that we have to become more trusting of people
Hmm.
around us. We have to become more open and honest with what's going on inside of us. And I think the ability to self examine, to look within yourself and say, you know what? Something has changed here. I don't
Hmm.
feel the same there's been a shift in the way I am thinking,
Mhm.
and not be afraid to reach out and say, okay, I need help with this. And I think for women especially,
Mhm.
it is a big challenge to show weaknesses in the areas of mental stability. Yes, we have our girlfriends that will go and will cry too,
Mhm.
but I think for the most part, we try to be strong in all situations.
Mhm.
Especially in today's society, you really don't want to come across as being overly emotional. I know that's a big thing for a lot of women that I know, where showing emotions is a big thing. It's like you got to be tough. You know, your world is crashing around you, but you still have to be tough because you have all these other people relying on your strength to get them through. So I know
Mhm.
for a lot of women, it is a big challenge to show emotional, instability, to admit, I'm depressed, to admit I'm suffering from anxiety. We will rant and rave about the things that are not going right in our relationships and other things, but when it comes to something isn't right in here,
Mhm.
dealing with it.
Mhm. And that's a huge thing. Like, or we have so many things going on, right? We have our kids. We don't, you hear a lot. I don't have time to go check on me. I have this and I have that and I have this. And it's like,
Yeah.
we've got to find something. We've got to
Yeah,
find
because
something.
we
Mhm.
fail to take care of ourselves.
Mhm.
And yet still we promote ourselves as being the caregivers of everyone that comes into our world.
Mhm.
Everyone. And that calls for inner strength.
Mhm.
An inner strength that sometimes need that support of the therapist, counselors, your pastor, the priest, other people who are licensed to give that support,
Right.
who can help you to look within for the trauma that is going on and bring about that healing that is necessary. Because as a female and having so many hats to wear,
Mhm.
I recognize the importance of self care. I recognize the importance of having a therapist or two or three to call on and say, look, my world is crashing. I need help. And I think that raising the awareness that the help is out there and that you don't have to do this alone. There are people who will walk that path with you. There are people
Mhm.
who will support you. I think raising that awareness is really important. Getting people to understand you're not alone in this.
Mhm.
Mental wellness or mental illness is not a rare disease. It is more common than people think. But
Mhm.
if we continue to ignore it, if we continue to put it under the rug, we will have a society of people who don't know how to adjust their emotions, who don't know how to adjust their inner thoughts and bring that balance that is needed so that they can live harmoniously with the world that they're in, so
Mhm.
that they find the peace and that joy that they really need to have a good life.
Mhm. I
So I
agree.
think that getting that awareness out there is important, where people know the groups you can go to, and as you said, the safe spaces you can go to.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot happening in terms of mental well-being. There's a lot happening.
Mhm. I agree.
And I would also go on to say that I know for a lot of communities, mental health is expensive. It is expensive.
Mhm.
And most people don't want to go to a public facility for mental health. It's like, I don't want to be seen coming out of the madhouse. Again, the stigma.
Mhm. And I think that's where it needs to be more available, more affordable, you know. Um, and I think it's something that needs to be pushed more, regarding getting mental health and finding places where you can seek that help.
The question I'm going to ask, and I don't even know if this is a question I should pose to you in terms of in the USA, I know you have medical insurance, but does medical insurance cover mental health as well?
Yes, to my knowledge, most coverages, offer it. I think it's harder sometimes. There's some red tape, especially when it's inpatient or intensive outpatient services. Insurance only pay for a couple of days. Well, that's not enough time to get the help that you need, right? Um, but one thing I do love is there are also places, not widely advertised, which is something that needs to happen more often. But there are those places who do sliding scales for people who do not have health insurance, um, and to make it more accessible for people. Um, but yeah, insurance will usually cover it. It's just every now and then there's that red tape, where you have to keep justifying why you're seeing this person, or where you have to justify why the stay needs to be continued in an inpatient or intensive outpatient program.
Understood. Well, we're on top of the hour and we're going to wrap up. Are there any closing words you would like to leave with our audience?
Just thank you for your time. And like I said, like I'm always gonna say, check on people, check on your people.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sharian Brown, for being our guest today. It's been very informative. I can definitely say that I have more information, and coming out of this, I realize that I have a lot more work to do in terms of having safe spaces in Barbados and maybe the wider Caribbean where we can deal with, and not just by talking, but have the facilities in place where people can come and have the kind of treatment that is necessary so that we have wellness, mental wellness for all. And with that, I would like to thank our audience for being here with us today.
Thank you.